So we all know that chapter 1 is Arjuna Vishada Yoga, which is the chapter which gives us the problem statement. So the problem statement here is the Arjuna's despondency or his dilemma, that he decides that he will not be able to fight the war. The chapter starts not just straight with Arjuna's despondency. We have a stage set where the first verse starts with Dhritarashtra asking a question to Sanjaya to describe him about what is happening in the battlefield, and Sanjaya have being a clairvoyant and he having that powers to see what is happening at distant places, he would start narrating what is happening in the battlefield. And from the second verse where Sanjaya narrates the story, it starts with Duryodhana talking about Pandava's army in the start, and he moves on talking about Kaurava's army later. And in this whole discussion about Duryodhana talking in terms of Pandava's army or Kaurava's army, what we analyzed is the state of mind of a person. If a person is having negative emotions, how does that person speak and what is the context behind his conversations? Is he speaking with a pure intention, or does his words have something to show what his character is? So we analyzed Duryodhana's character in those verses where we understood that he has a lot of internal insecurity, but he projects in the front as if he is very strong. Taking the Pandavas army in the first shows his nature, that he feels that their army is stronger than his, even though in the number actual counts, Kauravas have a larger battalion than Pandavas. So once all this happens, he will be talking actually to his master Dronacharya. And when he is talking all these things to Dronacharya, the master is not going to reply anything. Instead of replying, he just keeps on listening to him. And there we understood the point that one needs to understand that if a person is ignorant and unwise, there is no point in responding to what he is saying, because anyway, that person is not going to change. So his silence shows us that we learn it's better to be silent in situations where we are dealing with ignorant people. And as an answer to that, Pitamaha Bhishma starts blowing his crown shell. So once he starts blowing his crown shell, it portrays that all the negativity that was given by Duryodhana is being eliminated by the sounds of the crown shell that he is blowing. Once he blows his crown shell, it is a sign that they are ready for the war. At the same time, Kaurava's side, they blew, and Pandava's side, we got the names of each crown shell. So each one of the 5 brothers had their own names for their crown shells. First, Krishna, who is the charioteer of Arjuna, blew his crown shell, followed by Arjuna, Bhishma, Yudhishthira, Nakula, and Sahadeva. And in that blowing of crown shells, the atmosphere was set to start the war. So when this happened, after that, immediately, when Lord Krishna takes the chariot and starts to go, Arjuna will request Krishna to take the chariot in between the battlefield, in the middle of the battlefield, to take and stop. So he goes there, stops, and he sees all of them, all his relatives, and Krishna just gives a context, or it's narration by Sanjaya, that Krishna is trying to say that, you see, you asked me to stop the chariot in between, I stopped, and now you see all your relatives or the Kurus in front of you. So that word Kuru is the emotional trigger that we understood, because till the time Arjuna was steadfast in fighting the war, he was very much keen to fight the war. And the reason why he asked to stop in between the battlefield was also to just see all of them against whom he is going to fight. And the moment Krishna stops his chariot in front of the battlefield, he triggers a word called Kuru, which brings up a lot of emotional connect to Arjuna, which clouds his intellect, and he becomes totally a prey to his emotions. So the moment this started, he feels that emotional connect with all his relatives. He feels that feeling of me and mine with everyone, and starts showing the emotional symptoms on his physical level, where he starts saying that he's shivering, he is not able to stand, his body is like burning, all the physical symptoms that he told in the second chapter, in the first chapter, at the later verses. After these symptoms, Krishna clearly understands that Arjuna is suffering from a kind of mental neurosis, which has come because of his emotional depression. And Krishna doesn't say anything here because the conversation of Krishna doesn't come in chapter 1. Still, the story goes on like that, where Arjuna still continues with the stance saying that it's not just his physical symptoms. He goes down and down the emotional, and he starts speaking about the philosophy, that it's not just the loss that's happening to himself or his people. He brings up the whole philosophy from the ancestors, that the society will be demolished, the balance between the people will be lost, and the caste system will be eliminated. And he finally concludes that waging a war or fighting this war is a sin. That's why I cannot fight. And he throws his bow down in despondency at the end of the chapter 1. So this is just that.
Abhita.
Yeah, good evening. So this is the slide that I had put in the middle, I think, to just show the steps of how the trigger happened and how did he fell a prey to the emotional feelings, which pulled him down to a non-thinking state. And that's the reason he started talking all these things. First, on his physical level, he told all his symptoms that he's not able because his body is like shaking, his body is burning like a fire, his hair is standing up, and all kind of physical symptoms. And after that, the second part or the last part, he tells about bringing about a philosophy, saying that look, Krishna, if I wage the war, destruction of family will happen, and that will bring down the values of families and culture. It increases the unrighteousness and impurities in women, and caste system will get mixed up. And finally, he says that waging the war leads him to hell, and that's the reason he don't want to fight, and shows up his despondency. So anyone have any doubts in the first chapter?
No, it's clear, Abhita.
Okay. So let's look at the chapter 2. Chapter 2 again starts with Arjuna's despondent condition and surrender. In the first 10 verses, he doesn't initially he doesn't completely surrender. The thing starts with Krishna saying that he is covered. He just tries to trigger, because as a psychotherapist, he understands the patient condition better. Even that he has said that he is going to commit sin and all, Krishna still wants to check on Arjuna. Is his emotional outburst completed or not? So for that, he just brings out a trigger in the second or third verse, saying that Arjuna, you are recovered being a Kshatriya, you're not fighting, and if you're not fighting, it's not manly, and all kind of things. And Arjuna, being a person who is very offended when you talk ill about him or down about him, or if you don't praise him, he is a person who reacts in a very different manner. So after that, he immediately comes back with the statement saying that he is not ready to kill all his gurus, instead of killing the gurus, it is better to go back in the forest and earn the food by begging. And he continues again with the things that this war is not going to help in any condition. The 2-3 verses continues, and finally in verse, I think 9 or 10, he tries to surrender to him, saying that he is now totally confused in what I'm doing, and I am your student, and I am surrendering to you. And even after that surrender, he speaks 10th verse, I think, saying still I'm still confused whether to fight or not. So it's not a complete surrender, but he has surrendered partially, telling that he is in a total confused state where he is not able to take any decision. Now the conversation of Lord Krishna comes into picture from the 11th verse, where 11th verse itself is a high philosophy verse, where he says that a different level of conversation, as we discussed. If you think of a 3-storied building, Arjuna is staying in the level 1, where he is attached to the materialistic relationships or the materialistic world of entanglements of me and mine, and not able to see and looking death as the end of everything. Krishna now starts the conversation from the level 1, which is a higher level, where he sees the death from the universal point of view. From Arjuna's point of view, death is something that he cannot take with. But from the universal point of view, when you see death, death is a natural process which occurs. So it's not something that Arjuna can stop, or it's not something that anyone else can stop. It's a natural process which occurs, and he talks about Atman in the few verses, that which is the nature of reality, saying that which is real, which is not real, what is truth, what is not truth, and tries to tell him and make him understand that Atman, which is this reality, that thing always stays. He tells about the qualities that no one can kill it, even the fire cannot destroy it, water cannot erase it, the wind cannot dry it, and he says that it is always there. It is like Ajo Nitya Shashvatoyam Puranaha. It is always there. It is from the ancient times. It is immovable and it is omnipresent. With all this nature of reality, he stops until the 11th, 30th. From 11 to 30 is total explanation of the nature of reality, which is the Atman. It's totally about Atman. How, what are its qualities? How is it? So after this, what happens when the doctor, being the Krishna, looks at the patient Arjuna, he doesn't see any signs of recovery or improvement. Then he thinks that no, this route is not giving me any kind of benefit. So what shall I do? So he takes a different stand where he moves from philosophy to practicality. So he brings the point of Swadharma into picture, where he starts addressing Arjuna in terms of his duty. He now tells, okay, Arjuna, leave everything. Leave from the angle of death. Don't look it from the angle of death. Now let's start looking things from the angle of duty. So who are you? You are a Kshatriya. So what's your duty? Your duty is to fight. And he tells like 5-6 verses where he gives a summary of what happens when he wins the war, what happens when he loses the war. And he tries to bring to a conclusion that even you win the war, you will enjoy the earthly pleasure. Even you lose the war, you die in the war, it is going to take you to heaven. It's not going away from the war prevents you from going to hell, but fighting the war and dying in the war still takes you to heaven and not to hell. So look from the angle of duty and think. And after coming to the 40th verse, where he concludes that both the ways, fighting the war when he fights the war, even it is a winning or even it is a losing, both are a positive outcomes to Arjuna. And he brings the Buddhi Yoga into picture from the verse 40, where he tells how the desire ridden actions work and how the actions without desire works. And in the verse 47, we get the principle of Karma Yoga, which is like the Karmanyeva Adhikaraste, where we are asked to work without having attachment to the fruits of action, and to leave all the yoga kshemam, whatever we want to acquire, whatever we want to preserve, on to complete surrender on the Lord, where he will take care of all our yoga and kshema, and we are supposed to focus on our goals and work without attaching to the fruits of the results with complete surrender. Then things will be taken care of. And the two things, I think 41 to 44 or 45 to 53 gives the thing where we got the definitions of yoga and the recipe for happiness, which is to see all the things equanimously from the physical level, mental level, and the intellectual level, which are the Sukha Dukkhe Same Krutva Labha Labha Jaya Jaya. We have seen the 3 levels, like happiness and sadness, profit and loss, gain or loss, all the 3 things from 3 levels. When we see them with equal mind, our mind will be at peace, or our mind will have a better state instead of restlessness. And we also, I think, have got the word of titiksha in the middle. I think it's like 11th, 12th. He says that we have to, Arjuna, to have the quality of titiksha, which is also very important, the quality of forbearance. He gives an example that summers are hot, winters are cold. It is the nature of itself. So you don't expect the opposite things. Instead of expecting opposite things, we are supposed to bear it with internal environment being calm and peace, not with agitations and restlessness. If you give the quality of titiksha in your life, you will not have any kind of mental agitation. So one of the things that Krishna told Arjuna is to develop the quality of titiksha. He says matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkadaha agama paino nityaha tam titikshastva bharata. So this is the same example that seasons come, seasons go. It's not the same at all the times. So we have to move on with the life with the principle that even this phase will go on and not create mental restlessness to any situations or any challenges that we face in our life. After this 53rd verse, Arjuna moved a bit or showed some kind of recovery symptoms. How do we know that he showed some recovery symptoms? Till verse 30, he did not react, in the sense there was no question or a conversation that Arjuna tried to strike with Krishna. That's why he moved the context from philosophy to practicality. Once the route has changed from philosophy to practicality, we could see in the verse 54, at least after talking all these things, he comes up with a question. When he has talked about the intellect, mind, and how you will be able to attain the state of samadhi. When your mind is calm, your intellect becomes very sharp, and at the time when intellect becomes very sharp and it comes into a state of halt, that's when you will realize your internal peace or your divine nature, and that's the way that leads you to self-realization. The moment all these verses are said, he gets up and asks, who is this person? What are you talking about? When you say that a person is a sthita prajna, who is he? How does he walk? What are his qualities? How does he contact the world? So he asked a couple of questions, 4 questions. And from the verse 55 till the end of the chapter is the response Lord Krishna gives on the qualities. The 18 verses are the qualities of sthita prajna. So we understood what are the qualities of sthita prajna. How does he contact the world? How is he giving up all the desires, not for the sake of renunciation, but because his mind is totally and satisfied with in himself, or he understands that he is the source of his own happiness. That's why he has cast away all his desires. And because of casting away all his desires, mind is at peace. He looks at everything with equanimity. And when he contacts the world, he is like a tortoise. He gets into the world, he contacts the world, and whenever he senses a danger, which is an unwanted desire, he pulls back all his senses, retracts them into his body, and moves to achieve his goal. So that is the person like Sthita Prajna. And after that, we have got the verses, the 2 profound verses, which is the fall, the 8-step fall. How does the fall happen? It starts with a thought develops into attachment to a desire, if not unfulfilled, gives rise to anger. And because of anger, we get deluded, and because of delusion, our memory doesn't function properly, or it takes to a memory loss. And because of that state, whichever action we do, it will not be the best action, and such actions leads to destruction. We saw that in the explanation of Sthita Prajna. And then he says how peace is attained when your actions are not propelled by likes and dislikes. And also after performing your actions, you do not end up adding up your likes and dislikes. Such a state of action will give you peace. And he again continues saying that why do we need peace? When mind is at peace, your intellect is sharpened. When your intellect is sharpened, you attain success. So he brings that context that you can be happy only when you are at peace. So he says when a person is not at peace, he cannot be happy. So happiness can be derived only when the person's mental state is at peace, or he is stabilized in his mind, or not having mental agitations. And he brings some metaphors of describing how the senses are, how powerful they are to carry away your mind and also to carry away your intellect, and how important it is to control the senses. And finally, he concludes saying, Arjuna, so you have to control your senses. Until you don't control your senses, you will not be able to reach the state of Sthita Prajna. And finally, he gives a metaphor of the ocean and the water coming from the rivers, as how the ocean is always complete and not disturbed by the waters coming from the rivers. In the same way, a self-realized person is also not disturbed by the external materialistic sense objects. Whatever sense objects comes in front of him, it is not going to agitate him or disturb him. Instead, he is content and happy within himself, and that nature remains throughout. And the last two verses describes about the summing up of all these and the state of Brahman, how it can be achieved. So this is the summary of chapter 2. Any questions? Or was it too fast in explaining?
No, it was okay, Abhita.
No, Abhita, very clear and very
No,
beautifully.
Abhita, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very nicely you gave the gist. I can
Yeah.
just imagine all the episodes, what we went through. Very nice. All the videos also just flashed. The
Okay.
examples you take. Thank you.
So it was just a summary I wanted to run through, but it itself took 20 minutes for me, I think. Because now you understand the flow. So when we go to the third chapter, we can continue with the flow. Let me share the third chapter slides. Okay. So third chapter is Karma Yoga. So karma is action. Yoga is doing the actual meaning we know it's to unite, but Karma Yoga is making your action into karma into yoga. How do you turn your actions into a yoga is this chapter about. So the summary or the main topics in this chapter are first 3 verses will be an introduction to the path of action, and from verse 4 to 19 it is Krishna's intellectual appeal for action, and 20 to 24 he brings about the emotional appeal for action, and from 25 to 35 he tells the technique of right action. 36 to 39 he tells what are the impediments of right action, and 40 to 43 he tells what way to overcome our impediments. So it's like a total summing up. There is no way that you will get lost or you will feel that he told something, is it really possible? Because he tells you the technique, he tells you what could be the showstoppers from achieving this technique or implementing the techniques, and he also tells you what are the ways you can overcome these showstoppers. So we are not going to miss out anything in terms of getting the technique of right action and implementing it. The only thing we need to do is to have the will to implement it. Other than that, the whole technique is given in this chapter. So we will go with the first verse. Atha trutiyodhyayah karma yogah Arjuna uvacha jayasi chet karmanaste mata buddhir janardana tat kim karmani gore mam niyojayasi keshava. So Arjuna is talking here. So after the second chapter, something worked. His first question was, who is Sthita Prajna? Who is that person? And now coming to third chapter starting, he is addressing Krishna with a question. And what is his question? Oh Janardana, oh Keshava. He addresses here with 2 names. First he says Mata Buddhir Janardana, and in the end he says Niyojayasi Keshava. So he's addressing with 2 names here. Why do you want to engage me in this ghastly welfare if you think that intelligence is better than fruitive work? I think Uma, you asked the last question. Why should he engage in war, right?
Yes, Abhita. Same thing I asked.
Same question he asks, because this is to
Okay.
understand that we are all Arjunas. Exactly the
Yeah.
same question he asked. Okay, you told me everything. You told me Sthita Prajna. You told me how he is, how will become, and finally what is going to happen. If that is the route to take, then why are you again asking me to go and fight the war? That was the question in Arjuna's mind. And what is the reason for this? He is asking is because this state shows the confused state of Arjuna here again. Why is he confused? He is not able to grasp what Krishna was trying to hint him. There, the sense control, everything Krishna was trying to include are the Jnana Yoga, the Buddhi Yoga, which was taught in second chapter by Krishna, was to make Arjuna understand the importance of it and to understand what is real and unreal, and to go and fight without any confusions and without any kind of mental disturbances and emotional disturbances. He did not understand that point. He takes two of them separately now. This is karma and that is jnana. And he thinks that he said jnana is great because the jnana yogi, Sthita Prajna, is a person who is walking in the path of knowledge. And a person who is walking in the path of knowledge is a jnana yogi. When the path of intellect is so great, why is that I have to work now? I can go and take the path of intellect when that is great. So the understanding difference of Arjuna here gives rise to this question. And also this portraying, we said every name that Vyasa, Vedavyasa uses here has a significance. Here he addressed Krishna with two names. One is Janardana and one is Keshava. If you see, both are contrasting. Janardana means a person who protects all the people, and Keshava is a person who has killed a demon named Keshi. So one name implies protector and one name implies a destructor. This names here itself is to bring the confused or a non-decisive state of Arjuna still for asking this question. So he again continues, Vyamishreneva vakyena buddhim mohayasiva me tadekam vada nischitya yena shreyo hamapnuyam. So he's telling, my intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be most beneficial for me. So he is now like smacking Krishna and saying, whatever you told, I am confused. I did not get clarity of what to do. It only gave me confusion. So now tell me, what is that I have to do? Instruct me my point. And here, this way of telling indicates that Arjuna is a Kshatriya or a warrior. And the nature of warrior is to take instructions and to implement them. So he's not a person who is contemplative. If a person who is contemplative, if you tell this philosophy, whichever we have learned in the second chapter, if that philosophy has been told to a person who is contemplative, they would have understood what is to be done after this. But Arjuna here is not a contemplative person. He is a person of action. He takes instructions and does actions as per the instructions. So he is bringing that point and showing his nature again here. He says, you tell me decisively. Nistitya is decisively, and he says Shreya is beneficial, which is good. So he's saying, which is good to me? Tell me that. I will go and do just that. Don't confuse me, because whatever you talk till now in second chapter caused me only utter confusion. This is the standpoint of Arjuna. Now, let's take the standpoint of Krishna. Why did Krishna teach all these things to Arjuna when he knows that Arjuna is not going to get benefit out of it, or he is still going to be confused? First, Arjuna considers Krishna as a person, as a good friend. He never knew Krishna as a person, or he is like Brahman, or he's like an avatar, and he's a person who has that profound knowledge. So to a friend, suppose I and Renu are good friends, and Renu doesn't know how much knowledge I have. We meet after some time. She doesn't know what all knowledge I have. And when she has a problem, she doesn't know I'm qualified to solve it or not. And she tells me the problem. And if she has to have that kind of trust in me, or the feeling in me that I am that much knowledgeable, I need to prove something to her. In the same way, now Krishna is trying to telling all these things to Arjuna to make Arjuna feel that Krishna has a high profound knowledge, because Arjuna was dumbstruck with all these things. This is a high philosophy. And when he saw Arjuna telling such a high philosophy, that is the nature of mind. He comes to understand, oh, Krishna knows all these things. So he must be able to help me in giving me decisions. If not, if he had not taken all these things and Krishna tells him something to do, he might not have listened, because he don't know whether the words of Krishna has a qualification or not. For that, he has given this high philosophy to just make Arjuna understand, or one of the reasons was to make Arjuna feel that Krishna has universal knowledge. He is able to impart that knowledge of self. So these are the path of, generally two paths that we have to choose when we do any action. Path of good or the path of perfection is simple, the actions driven by our intellect, and the path of pleasant is the path which is easy and relaxing but painful at the end, which is the actions driven by our mind. So at any point of time we discussed there could be two drivers for our action. One could be our intellect, one could be our mind, or sometimes it could be concurrence with both our mind and also our intellect. So he's asking, you tell me now, what is the path of good for me? What is that that gives me long lasting peace and happiness? So it's not important to hold all good cards in life, but it's important how well you play with the cards which we hold, which is very true. It's not important that we need to have all good things in our life, but how do we manage life with the things we have makes a difference in the happiness we get or the happiness we have. So this is just a summary of what I told. So Krishna explained the knowledge of immortal self. He then reminded Arjuna of his duty as a warrior and said performing it would result in glory and celestial abodes. After prodding Arjuna to his occupational work as a Kshatriya, Krishna revealed a superior principle, the science of Karma Yoga, and asked Arjuna to detach himself from the fruits of his work, which is the Karmanyavadikaraste. In this way, bondage creating karmas would be transformed into bondage breaking karmas. What we are trying to do, karma when done in a normal way creates bondage, in the sense produces more and more desires, which increases our vasanas. So we will be continuing our life forever and ever because we are bound to karmas. But when we do actions in the spirit of karma yoga or learn to do karma as a yoga, then what will happen? We will be breaking the bondage to attain liberation. He termed the science of working without desire for rewards as Buddhi Yoga or Yoga of intellect. By this, he meant that mind should be detached from worldly temptations by controlling it with a resolute intellect. And the intellect should be made unwavering through the cultivation of spiritual knowledge. That's why spiritual knowledge is also very important. He did not suggest that actions should be given up, but rather attachment to the fruits of action should be given up. But Arjuna, his first question here says he is totally confused. And that's why he asked that question. Why he misunderstood? He thought that when knowledge is superior to action, why should I perform action? He did not understand the relationship between the knowledge and the action. And he further says, by making contradictory statements, because you are saying that Jnana Yoga is the ultimate and you are asking me to fight. So these are contradictory statements. And because of this contradictory statement, my intellect means Arjuna's logic is being perplexed. Why is this? How can this be? So I know you are merciful and your desire is not to baffle me. So he's saying, so please dispel my doubt. You clear? What is that I have to do now? So now Lord Krishna starts replying to Arjuna's question. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Lokesmin Dvividha Nishta Pura Prokta Mayanagha Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam Karma Yogena Yoginam. So he says, at the beginning, I declared two paths for pure heart, the intuitive path of spiritual wisdom and the active path of selfless service. He says, Lokesmin, in this world, we have two paths. Dvivida is two paths. And what is that? He is addressing Arjuna here as Anagha. What is that? One is Jnana Yoga. And from Jnana Yoga, what do you get? You get the spiritual wisdom. Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam. And Karma Yogena Yoginam. What happens with Karma Yoga? When you do karma in the form of yoga, you become a yogi. When you become a yogi, you grow upper and upper in your spiritual path. So here what Krishna is describing in this verse, he says that lokesmin vivida nishta, and two of them are not described as two different paths. He says there is a path which we have to follow, and it is a twofold path. One is the path of jnana and one is the path of karma. Even jnana, because he describes the world as a sect of two different people, groups of two people. One group of people are contemplative people who take more and more knowledge from the world, and one group of people are the people of action who are more involved with the materialistic sense objects of the world. We will take a small example to understand what is this karma and what is this jnana which is needed. Suppose I have to catch a flight from New York to India. I'm staying in New Jersey. I have to come and catch a flight. So the path that I have, one of the path that I have to take is, how should I come from New Jersey to New York airport? How will I determine? I need to have some knowledge of how the traffic is, how the weather is, or what are the means of transport that I could take. So all these comes under the knowledge. My main action is to travel from New York to India, someplace in India. But to have that action done, what I need to have as a prerequisite is a proper knowledge on what are the conditions like for me, so that I can reach from New Jersey to New York airport on time. In the same way, for us to do our actions, our intellect should be fed with the right kind of knowledge, because of which when we do an action, we have to think and do. To think and do, you need to have the right information. If you don't have the right information or the right wisdom, you cannot choose what is right and what is wrong, or what would be the cause and what would be the effect. The cause and effect you need to know. If you don't know the fire is hot, when you see the fire, you can touch it, you cannot touch it. You will not come to a conclusion that you should not touch it, because you are not aware of the cause and effect there. So the knowledge gives you, or the jnana gives you, that kind of cause and effects which you keep in your mind as wisdom. And when you are acting, you will use, and it goes on in a cyclical manner. We need to perform the action with the intake of knowledge. That's what as far as karma yogi is concerned. But as far as a person who is jnana yogi, and his path is different, because he offloads desires through his actions, and what he intakes more and more is the self knowledge to progress. So his way of spiritual journey, his spiritual practices are different from our spiritual practices. We have to take a different kind of, see, when we started on this sadhanas, I have told the first sadhana to have intentions, affirmations, because firstly, our mind is not in a state where we have accepted the truths of life. And that's the reason we create a lot of mental restlessness. So our spiritual sadhana starts from the point where we try to tell or teach our mind, come to terms with the truths of the universe. But a person who starts the spirit practice or sadhana in the path of jnana yoga, or a person who is contemplative, he has started his journey by taking or believing the truths of the universe. So there is no need for him to go down to the level that we are going, drilling, that means walking, doing everything with bringing mindfulness into our things and all, because he has already developed all those things. And that's why he is a person who is in the path of contemplation. For him, his activities are different. For us, our activities are different, but still everyone has to act. No one can escape acting. Everyone acts, but in a different way, in a different mode, depending upon what our practices are and what are we aiming for to progress in our life. So ours is an active path of selfless service. That's what we have to learn and do in the Karma Yoga. And for Jnana Yogi, It is an intuitive path of spiritual wisdom, which is more contemplative. So when we take the hierarchy of actions, we will get this in many chapters, 3 terms, which we call it as karma, akarma, and vikarma. V is generally in Sanskrit is something that gives a negative meaning. So karma are actions that we need to do, and vikarma are the actions that we should not do, the do's and don'ts. So don'ts, we know, like we are not supposed to tell lies, we are not supposed to harm others. So all these don'ts we have learned from our morals and ethics. Those are the vikarmas, which will give us bad credits. Karma are the actions that we are supposed to do. And separate from this, there is something called as inactivity, which is called akarma. And this akarma, we will again in 4th chapter also, we will go in detail. To just give you a brief idea, what do you mean by inactivity is, it is not that we don't work at all. There are 2 ways to look at it. One from the absolute point of self, but I'm not touching that now because we will deal it in 4th chapter. But from the physical, the relative standpoint, what inactivity means is that you perform an activity, but the credits or debits or the fruits of the action, whether it is good or bad, is not accounted for you because the intention of doing that. For example, take a soldier. He goes and fights against other countries in the battlefield and kills people. He doesn't have any motive or intention. He performs action, but the credits or debits for that particular action doesn't come into his account. That is akarma. Whereas when you do something with a personal motive, you are going and killing a person out of your personal motive, selfishness, or to grudge, whatever it could be, then the fruits of that action, credit or debit of that action, will be accounted to your own bank account. Whereas in a case of akarma, you will not get any credits or debits for your activity because that activity is not done with even though that activity is a gross activity, the intention is not a selfish intention. For example, take a doctor. He uses a knife to do an operation, but still that is to save the life and not to kill the life. The same way, if a person uses the knife for a selfish reason, then that is vikarma, action that had to be avoided. So are you clear with the difference between karma, akarma, and vikarma?
Yes, Abhita.
And in karma, karma is again divided into few karmas, which we say nitya karma is our obligatory duties. So we are playing multiple roles in our lives. In each role, whatever duties, set of duties comes as a package. So you're a mother, there is a package of obligatory duties that we have to do. So all those obligatory duties, which as a person is coming with your life, we have to do it. So for such obligatory duties, there should not be any likes and dislikes. They have to be executed for the sake of executing. So you cannot say, I don't like it, or I'm not liking it, or whatever it is. Obligatory duties or nitya karma has to be performed without any kind of likes and dislikes. So naimittika karmas are occasional duties which we might be performing at certain points of time. They might not be very regular, but yeah, it could be some things that we perform occasionally. So guests come to our house, so we take care of guests. So that is all naimittika karmas, which comes at a certain point of time, but which will not be constant and consistent. And kamya karmas are the actions done to satisfy your personal desires. So they're not for anyone else, but just to satisfy your personal desires. If you do any kind of action, that is called kamya. Kamya is desire, kamya karma. And in a nutshell, what is encouraged is to do your nitya karmas, naimittika karmas, and to reduce the number of kamya karmas so that you will not add up more desires to your bucket list and develop more and more vasanas, because of which you will not be able to transcend your purpose of life. And again, the vasanas and desires, like They are like chemicals. So if they come close together, what will happen? Reaction happens and it will keep on increasing. That's why to stop that chemical reaction from happening, we have to perform karma as a yoga where you will be exhausting the vasanas, in the sense whenever the reaction happens, when your desires are getting reduced and reduced, or the current desires are getting exhausted, there will be no byproducts that gets formed because of the reactions. We are all extroverts, meaning people who are working actively in the world. For us to go introvert, we have to take the help of Jnana Yoga, a proper knowledge, to assist or accompany the actions that we are doing. So this is the cycle of bondage. When you do an action, you have a result, and that actually results in the impressions or creates vasanas. And these impressions again turn, once you take a new life, it comes back as desires, and this desire, so this cycle goes on. So the ultimate aim of Karma Yoga is to break this bondage. So we are with a bucket list, we are with the vasanas. What we are here and the purpose of life is to exhaust our existing vasanas. Clear until these 3 verses?
Yes, Abhita.
So we'll share from the 4th verse in the next class, because that will be again going in a flow. So I don't want to start now and have a little bit done. Let's take that complete section flow in the next class. Any questions, any sharings? We have 8 more minutes.
I just have one doubt, Abhita.
Yeah, Uma.
So in the second chapter now, it was saying that you should have a goal and you have to work towards the goal, right?
Yeah.
So working towards a goal is also a desire, right?
Yes. So here,
Then how can
whenever
we desire less? How can we reduce a desire when we need to have a goal?
the desires that we will again speak in Karma Yoga, the desires, when we say these desires are desires which are unchecked by your intellect. So it doesn't mean we are a sannyasi and totally desireless, because we are active people working in the world. So whenever we say desires, we talk about unchecked and unwanted desires. If that desire, see, I want to eat, it's a desire because I am hungry. That is approved, that is correct. So that is not going to affect you or create you restlessness. But I am full. I look at a sweet. I'm just tempted to eat. I eat, I get stomach pain. That kind of desire creates restlessness. So whenever we say desire, we will read in the 3rd chapter that this desire is the nitya, the constant enemy for us. That is the impediment that we have to do karma in the spirit of Karma Yoga. So the desire means not completely giving up everything or the materialistic possessions that we have or the thought we have, but to just always keep in mind, is that approved by our intellect? Have you approved it? If you have approved it, that will never create you restlessness. You will always have peace and happiness. But why we are having restlessness in our mind? Because the desires or the actions, where somewhere it's not approved by our intellect. We are on the emotional side of doing things. So whenever we say goal, because goal helps your intellect to keep your mind in check.